Sandy, could you please open the blinds? Sandy hesitated, a gentle smile on her face as she looked at Alice, who was lying on the bed, covered in massive drapes of sheets. The sun is out, Mrs. Jones. Yes, yes. Alice nodded, returning the smile. I know. That's why I want the blinds open. Okay. Sandy, Alice's palliative nurse, nodded and walked to the window, slowly drawing back the curtains and pulling the blinds apart. The room was instantly flooded with golden light, and a happy gasp fell from Alice's lips. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the warmth of the sun wash over her feeble body. When she opened them again, she saw the beautiful sun's rays spill across the bed, casting warm streaks of light over the sheets. Her body was heating up due to the rays, and Alice tried to push the sheets off but failed. Her body felt heavy, like the weight of the cancer ravaging her system has seeped into her bones. Every movement was a monumental effort that came with pain. Mrs. Jones. Sandy drifted towards the bed, the gentle smile never falling from her lips. Do you need help? Yes, please. Could you help me get these sheets off? They're quite heavy. Sandy laughed. Yes, they are. And they're good for you because your bones must be protected from the cold. She slid the sheets off Alice's body and sat on the chair beside her. How do you feel? Alice smiled, but it was strained and sad. She didn't remember when she was last happy. Just tired. Little bit of pain. Sandy nodded. Don't worry. In a few hours you can take your next dose of painkillers. Alice turned to the large windows by the bed, her head filling with so much thought she could hardly enjoy the outside view of a world she no longer seemed to be a part of. For 3 years she had been battling leukemia. When she first discovered it, she went through a series of active treatments, hoping it would help. As a multimillionaire, she could afford the best forms of cancer treatments, but none of it worked. For years, she continued to fight and subject herself to the harsh treatment of this body-ravaging disease, until 4 months ago the medical board in her hospital advised her to stop the treatments because it was negatively impacting her overall health and reducing her quality of life. They assigned 3 palliative nurses to her home care, one of which was Sandy, Alice's favourite. For 4 months, Alice has stayed at home, confined to this bedroom, waiting for the day she would shut her eyes forever. At 32 years old, she was supposed to be full of life. Years ago, she had such big dreams and high hopes for herself. Who knew that a time would come when she would wish for death? She was wealthy, with many cars, landed properties, and a thriving restaurant chain. None of it mattered in the face of bad health. Do you want some ice cream? Sandy asked. Alice started to shake her head, but the nurse nudged her playfully. There's mint chocolate chip, Sandy said. Your favourite. Alice glanced at her curiously. I thought you said we were out of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Sandy's smile widened. Mr. Jones had several tubs delivered, along with a flower bouquet. Alice gasped and tried to sit up, but a sharp pain flashed through her body. Careful! Sandy propped a few pillows behind her, helping her sit up comfortably. Why didn't you tell me George sent me flowers and ice cream? Alice asked, unable to stop her smile. It's her first genuine smile of the day. You were sleeping and I didn't want to wake you, Sandy said. Should I go and get it? Yes, please. The flowers too. When Sandy left the room, Alice's body thrummed with excitement. The cancer would have killed her faster if she didn't have a wonderful, caring, and loving husband. George was the best man she could have ever asked for. It's like the universe knew she would fall sick and gave her Georgie as a solace. Ever since they discovered the cancer years ago, he had been her source of strength and hope. On days when she was sick and tired of life, George was always there to encourage her. On nights when the pain was overwhelming, George would cry with her and pray for her. During the day, he would send her romantic texts, flowers, chocolates, some cute jewellery, everything he could to put a smile on her face. In her next life, she would choose George again. They have been married for 6 years, and the love only grew stronger. Sandy reappeared and Alice gasped at the huge lavender bouquet. Dangling from one of the stems is a card. Alice excitedly took the bouquet and flipped the card to read it. It said, "Lavender is a flower that symbolizes healing and strength. With this bouquet, I hope you get lots of it. I can't wait to come home to you and your lovely smile. I love you so much, Mrs. Jones, counting the seconds until I'm back. P.S. Nurse Sandy mentioned your favourite ice cream flavour is no longer in the fridge, so I ordered some. Enjoy. When I return home, we can have some while we watch Modern Family. With love, George." Alice laughed, rereading the letter several times before inhaling the flowers. It smelled heavenly. "I love lavenders," Sandy said, setting the ice cream tub by the bedside table. "The scent puts me right to sleep." "Oh, is that why I suddenly feel sleepy?" Alice teased. "I love them." "Mr. Jones knows you would," Sandy answered. "Your husband loves you so much, Mrs. Jones. As a nurse, I rarely see husbands stand with their wives through harsh bouts of sickness such as this. He's been wonderful." "I know," Alice chuckled. She glanced at the overhead clock and sighed. It's only 2 p.m, and George returned by 5, 3 more hours without him. "Can you help me put this in a case?" Alice yanked the card out and handed the bouquet to Sandy. When Sandy left, she grabbed the ice cream tub and relaxed against the pillows, looking outside again with a fresher perspective. Despite the sadness and overwhelming fatigue, Alice revelled in the love of George and the feel of the sun on her skin. They're a small reminder of life's beauty amidst the struggle. "Arya, wait!" George grabbed Arya's hand, but she jerked away from his touch and stormed across the room, her eyes full of anger and frustration. "Get your hands off me!" she hissed. "Leave me alone!" George sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Come on, don't be difficult." Arya gasped and turned to him, hurt filling her eyes. "Difficult? I'm being difficult. George, we have been dating for 5 years, and in all this time, nothing has happened. You're still with your wife," she cried. "For 5 years, I've been the other woman. I'm tired of it." George watched Arya come undone, feeling a sense of remorse. He liked Arya a lot, and in the years since his wife Alice got sick with cancer, she's been his ray of sunshine. The sex between them was great. They had fun. Everything was great. He didn't want to lose her. "Arya." George moved towards her, but she frowned and skipped out of the way, walking to the other side of the spacious living room to put distance between them. "Arya, come on. You know Alice is sick. It's only a matter of time before she dies. She's stopped active treatments and has been home for 4 months. I could return home now to hear she's dead. I've told you this several times. Please, it's—" "You've been saying this for years," Arya cut him off. "I'm tired of living in motels, George. I'm tired of staying with friends and waiting on the phone until we can meet again. I want something stable. I want something concrete. I want us to live together. Like a real couple." George walked towards her again, and this time, she let him. He stopped before her, gently grabbing her shoulders and kissing her softly. "If only you'll have more patience," he said. "Last month, Alice signed everything she owned to me. I've always had access to her wealth, but once this transfer is finalized, everything will be in my name, and I can go ahead and buy us a house. I know it's what you've always wanted. But is it what you want?" "Of course it's what I want," George answered. "I love you. Don't you know that? I love you so much, Arya." "Then leave Alice. Break up with her." George gaped at Arya in shock. He loved her, but he was more desperate for his financial gain. And if he divorced or broke up with Alice, he would get nothing. "I can't do that," he said. "If I break up with Alice, I may get nothing. Then how do you want us to live the life we want? How can I afford our dream home and vacations?" Arya was quiet until she eventually shook her head and barked a dark laugh. "I've wasted 5 years, George. I won't waste one more day on your empty promises." She shrugged his arm off and took several steps back. "I'm done, George, I'm done." She started to walk towards the door, but Arya shook him off. "What do you mean you're done?" "It's over between us. I'm done," she answered. "Come on. After 5 years, you want to leave when Alice is almost dead?" "She's been almost dead for 3 years," Arya exploded. "She obviously isn't going to die unless you do something about it. Don't call me anymore, George. We are over." She stormed out of the house, leaving George behind. As he drove back home, George thought about what Arya said when she was leaving. "She isn't going to die unless you do something about it." Arya was right. Alice wasn't going to die unless he did something about it. The more he thought about it, the more sense it made. There was a part of him that was nervous and afraid about what he was thinking. But there was another part of him that justified it. There was no need to feel guilty. Alice was already in pain. He would only be helping her to alleviate that pain permanently. By the time he drove his car into the garage, his mind was already made up. As he walked toward the front door, the gravel in the drive crunching under his feet, George schooled his expression into calm and affection for the wife he never loved. Alice was a beautiful, wonderful woman, but he was only in this relationship for the money. He got sucked into marriage, but he didn't plan to stay married for long. Walking through the front door, he saw Nurse Sandy running towards the kitchen and frowned. His heart skipped, hoping his dreams had finally come true. Sandy only looked worried like this whenever Alice had a crisis. "Sandy," he called, following her into the kitchen, assuming the expression of a doting husband. "How's my wife? What's wrong?" "She's in pain." Sandy grabbed a bottle of water, forcing a professional smile. "But she will be fine." George followed Sandy into Alice's room to see her writhing on the bed, her face scrunched in pain. George rushed to the bed. "Alice," he said, smoothing her hair back. I'm here. You'll be fine." "George." Alice opened her eyes and grabbed his arm. "My body hurts. The pain." "I know. I'm sorry," he said, shaking his head. "I wish I could take the pain." "Mrs. Jones." Sandy appeared beside them with the water bottle and tablet. "Here, use this." She helped Alice swallow the tablet and drink some water before stepping back. "After an hour, I'll give you your medications, but this has to dissolve first," she said. "You'll be fine. Don't worry. Sorry about the pain." George suddenly turned to the nurse while steadily rising to his feet. "Please, Nurse Sandy, you can go. I'll ensure she takes her medications," he said. Sandy hesitated. She still had 30 minutes until she had to leave, but she trusted George enough to know he would take good care of his wife. "Are you sure? I'm sure." George smiled. He reached for the medications on the cabinet. "This one, she has to take 2 pills." He pointed to the first pack. "This one pill, and the second after 8 hours. This last one tonight, and the other early tomorrow morning." "Yes," Sandy smiled. "That's exactly how." George returned the smile. "I can handle it. She's my wife?" "Okay." Sandy nodded before walking back to the bed where Alice was already relaxing. "I'll see you in the morning, Mrs. Jones." "I'll walk you out." George followed the woman out of the room and towards the door, where he waved her goodbye and returned to the room. Alice groaned in pain when she saw him, tears falling out the sides of her eyes. George tried to feel something, but all he felt was pity. Alice was a good woman and didn't deserve this, but he wouldn't change a thing because he desperately needed her gone. "George." She held out her arm for him, and he rushed towards her, holding her affectionately and laying beside her on the soft mattress. "Thank you for the ice cream," she said, "and the flowers." He waved it off. I hate seeing you in pain, Alice. It breaks my heart, he said in a shaky voice. I wish there was a way I could take the cancer and relieve you of it. I will. I'd rather go through this pain than you. No, no. She shook her head. I'd never put you through this. You're everything to me, George. I love you so much. I love you more, George blinked, and a torrent of tears fell down his face. Please fight this. Fight for me. Fight for us. I feel scared, Alice. Don't do this. I beg you. Every time I see you this way, I think the worst. The pain kills me, George, Alice said, a twinge of sadness in her voice. She was always the warrior, but now she sounded defeated. I've been holding on for you, but I don't want to hold on anymore. She forced herself to sit despite the pain warring in her eyes. George, when I go, I want you to live your life to the fullest. These past 5 years have been nothing but bliss. It's time for you to live for yourself and not for me. I'm thankful that I signed everything I have to your name. Live your life. George shook his head, more tears pouring down his face. No, if you're not here, then what's the point of all this wealth? I didn't marry you for the money. I married you for you. What's the money without you? I'll donate it all to charity. It's useless without you. No! Alice burst into tears and flung her arms around him. They clinged to each other, crying and sniffing. An hour after Sandy's departure, George untangled himself from Alice. It's time for you to take your medications, he said. It's been an hour. He looked around, knowing he deliberately left the medications in the living room. I left them outside, he said to his wife. Let me go get it. Okay. She got into a more comfortable position as he left the room. George hurried into his room and headed to the cabinet where he kept sedatives. He's had this for a while and had never thought about using them. The standard dose was 1 tablet, but George took out 4 of them and left the room. On his way back to Alice's room, he grabbed her medication. Again, he tried to feel something for what he was about to do, but all he felt was the energetic pump of adrenaline in his blood. When he walked into the room, Alice was already dozing off. Alice, he touched her gently. Come on, baby, you have to take your drugs. She sat up, and when he placed the drugs in her hands, she frowned. I don't have blue pills, she said. George laughed. Sandy gave me this when I walked her out. She said it was for the pain. Okay. Alice swallowed the 4 pills at once. What about my usual medication? She asked, setting down the water bottle. We have to wait 2 hours before you take that, he answered, getting into bed with her. Okay. Alice yawned and leaned against him, shutting her eyes. George knew the exact moment she was knocked off. Her body became heavier, and her breath more laboured. He shook her gently, but she didn't respond. Alice? No answer. Alice. He pushed her, and she fell back to the bed like jelly. He rushed to his feet and grabbed his phone, calling Arya. Thankfully, she picked up immediately. I told you not to call me ever again. What exactly is wrong with you? You... Arya. He cut her off. Arya, listen. She stopped. What? Meet me at my house, now. He turned to look at Alice, who was still knocked out. What? Arya exclaimed. What about your wife? You'll see. He hung up. Arya arrived to meet George in the driveway. She hurried towards him, her face a mask of confusion. What's happening? She asked. Where's your wife? You never let me come here to visit. George yanked the door open to reveal Alice sprawled in the back seat, looking unconscious. Arya gasped, her eyes widening. What's wrong with her? Is she dead? She'll be dead soon, he said. Get in the car. Arya hurried into the passenger seat, and George pulled out of the driveway. Arya looked restless, and she kept glancing at Alice in the back seat. What's going on? Where are we going? To her father's house. What? She screamed. Why am I coming with you then? Would he be happy to see his daughter like this? Relax, George rolled his eyes. Her father has been dead for years. The place is located deep in the woods and is very deserted. It's the best place. The best place for what? Arya. George reached out to pat her hair. Relax. Okay. You'll find out. Alice came awake, but only her eyes could move. Her body felt like lead, heavier than usual. And it took her a moment to realize that something was holding her down, keeping her in place. Slowly she came awake, realizing that there was a deep fear in her belly. As the fog in her head cleared, she realized something hard and uncomfortable bit into her back, like she was lying on a hard bench. She tried to sit up, but a harsh texture dug into her arms and stomach, forcing her gaze open to see that her arms and body were tied on a bench. Panic rose to her throat as she looked around the dimly lit space, realizing that she was in her father's house. Oh God, it's been so long since she came here. Since the sickness and her being unable to travel, she had not been able to visit this place at all. Oh God, George, where was he? What happened? Why was she... But this was all your idea. George's voice penetrated the heavy fog in her head, and she tried to shout his name, but it felt like her mouth was full of lead and cotton. Alice took a deep breath, but her ribs protested forcefully, sending a wave of pain through her body. She winced. How was it my idea, George? A feminine voice sounded now, forcing Alice to be still. I didn't ask you to kill her. I only said I was waiting for her to die. Well, she wasn't ready to die, George yelled back. Alice just wouldn't die, so I decided to do something about it. Is she dead yet? The feminine voice asked. It's been 3 hours, and she hasn't woken up. She is probably dead from an overdose. But we have to be sure, George said. That's why I plan to inject her with this. It contains more sedatives. We have to be sure she's dead, or this could bite us in the ass. Shock and disbelief slammed into Alice like a poleaxe as she put their words together and figured out what was happening. George wanted her dead. Her heart bled. She realized there was no way she could be lying here if it wasn't for George. The 4 blue pills she took weren't her drugs. They were sedatives. She knew it. Only that she trusted George and thought nothing of it. George's betrayal stung, and involuntary tears slipped out of her eyes. She could almost hear cracks as her heart broke in her chest. Who was the woman with him? Did George ever love her? Or was it all an act? She met George 7 years ago during the launch of the 7th restaurant in her father's business chain. He was a reporter sent to cover the event by his company's media team, and she liked how cool and charismatic he was. However, she kept calm and stayed away until he made the first move. For almost a year, George actively pursued her until she gave him a chance. 2 years later, they were married. In all this time, he had never yelled at her, never refused her anything, nor ever done anything to make her sad. Where did this come from? Why did he hate her so much that he wanted her dead? At the sound of approaching footsteps, Alice shut her eyes tightly, afraid that they would find her awake and murder her in cold blood. As she felt them enter the room, she itched to open her eyes and confront George. She also wanted to see the woman with him. Was it someone she knew? Who else could want her dead? She treated everyone well, including her staff. Why would anyone want this? George, look! She has tears on her face. It's like she can feel what we're about to do to her, the woman noted, sounding so close. Gosh, I feel so sorry for her now. So what? George spoke harshly, and Alice flinched internally, realizing that she had never heard him speak that way before. It became apparent that she didn't really know George. What she knew was a facade. You feel so sorry for her, so should I keep her alive? Looks like you're not ready to be with me. As long as Alice is alive, she's my wife. so you and I can never be together. Plus, she has signed all her wealth to me. I have to make sure she's dead, or she'll take it back." Relax, the lady snapped. "You're being too—" A loud thump cut through their argument, and they went silent. Alice shuddered, hoping someone was out there to save her. She was trying so hard not to burst into tears, but with every moment she remained with them, she was afraid they would inject her. "What was that sound?" the lady whispered. "I thought you said no one ever came here." "Yes," George answered. "No one. I don't know what that is." "You should check. If it's—" Before the lady could finish her sentence, a dog barked, and the door rattled like something heavy was thumping against it. The lady jumped, hitting Alice accidentally in the face. It hurt, but she stayed frozen. "What the heck, George?" she whispered. "How could you be so careless? Someone is out there." "Shh," George growled. "Do you want to get us killed?" In the background, the dog continued to bark and thump against the door. Soon they hear a man's voice in the distance. Alice said a quick prayer, hoping whoever was out there would find her. "Let's leave," the lady answered. "This woman is dead. I can't see a pulse, and she's been unconscious for hours. Plus, she was already seriously sick. 4 pills are enough to kill her." George was silent for a moment. "But, fine," the lady cut him off. "I'm out of here. I see a back door. I'll go that way." She moved away. Alice felt George's presence beside her, and she wanted to open her eyes and ask why, but she stayed silent. Soon she heard him grunt and storm away too. When she felt alone, she squinted her eyes open, swallowing a scream. George and the lady were still close. If she screamed, they might hear and return to finish her off. Jack loved the woods because he loved to be alone. His shack, which was down the long bushy path, was the only house in the vicinity, and he'd been living that way for years. When you've made the type of mistakes that Jack has made in his life, you would crave isolation too. It was one of the ways he chose to punish himself. However, Jack wasn't really lonely. He had Rick, his loyal German shepherd, who had been with him for almost 7 years. They walked this path every evening to exercise Rick's legs. Rick was energetic and playful, but he was a generally good dog, so Jack was shocked when Rick yanked off his leash and dashed toward the only other house around. The house had been there before Jack built his shack, but no one ever came. It was an abandoned house, and they passed it daily without Rick batting an eyelid. "Rick!" he called, running after his dog. "Rick, come on! What are you doing?" Jack's eyes widened in confusion when Rick climbed onto the porch and began to throw his weight against the front door, his stance angry and threatening. "Rick, down!" Jack ordered. But Rick didn't obey. That's when Jack knew something was wrong. If there was an order Rick never disobeyed, it was down. He crept towards the front door, his eyes scanning the place for any sign of danger. This place was abandoned, so he could walk into anything right now. As soon as he climbed onto the porch with Rick, he heard the roaring sound of an engine tearing through the silence. He whirled around to see a jeep pulling away from the property and jetting down the road. He stared at the disappearing vehicle in shock and confusion, wondering what just happened. Just then, he heard a slight sound from within the house. "Help!" Rick barked again, and Jack leaned against the door, pressing his ears to the hardwood. "Help!" The small voice sounded again. This time Jack tried the knob, but the door was locked. He banged the wood. "Is someone in there?" "Please help," he heard the call again. This time he kicked the door so hard that it swung open. The living room was empty, but Jack knew he heard someone's cry. Rick zoomed past him, sniffing the ground as he tried to pick up a scent. Jack followed the dog into the first room in the hall, where they saw a woman tied to an ironing board. She looked frail, her head completely bald. "What the heck?" Jack ran towards her, loosening the ropes and helping her up. As soon as she was loose, she flung her arms around Jack, and burst into heart-wrenching sobs. He comforted her while Rick searched the house. "It's okay," Jack said in a soothing voice. "You're okay." The woman continued to weep, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. "My husband," she cried. "He tried to kill me. Oh." "What?" Jack frowned and held her at arm's length, remembering the jeep he saw pulling away at neck-breaking speed outside. "Your husband?" "Yes," the woman nodded, her eyes full of tears. "He just left with another woman. They connived to kill me. They left me here thinking I was dead because he gave me a sedative overdose when we were home." "Why did your husband try to kill you?" Jack asked. "For my money," her voice broke. "He wants my money." Jack frowned. "Hold on. Let me call the police." Rick entered the room as Jack called the police and told them everything. He watched from the corner of his eyes as the strange woman patted Rick's head and thanked him for saving her life. "The police are on their way," Jack said, studying her. He could tell there was something wrong with her. She looked too sickly and pale. It had nothing to do with the ordeal she just went through. "What's your name?" he asked her. "I'm Alice." "Jack," he answered. "And this is Rick." Alice smiled. "Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Rick. You both saved my life." As if he could understand her appreciation, Rick whined, and they both laughed. "Let me get you water," Jack said before finding his way to the kitchen. As he filled a glass with water, he frowned, wondering at the sudden change of events. His day had taken a 360 turn, and he didn't even know how to handle it. Alice gulped down the water so fast Jack fetched her another one. She drank this slowly, and colour returned to her skin. The police arrived 10 minutes later, and they filed a report. As Alice described what her husband and the strange woman did, Jack felt hurt and angry. It was unfair how you could trust someone with all your heart, and they would still hurt you. He hated to think about what could have happened if Rick didn't bark and scared them off. The police left 15 minutes later, promising to find Alice's husband. Jack walked towards the bed, where the woman looked dazed and completely heartbroken. Rick was curled at her feet like he'd known her for ages. "Are you okay, Miss Alice?" "Please call me Alice," she said. "Please." "Okay, Alice." Jack smiled. "Are you okay?" "Yes." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I'm not dead," she said jokingly. "That still counts for something, right?" "Right," he answered with a nod. "I guess I'll go." He gestured for Rick to come with him. "You'll be okay?" Her head snapped up and she tried to climb off the board, but she winced with pain and fell on her back, a groan escaping her lips. Jack raced to her, his face marred with worry. He touched her skin, which had a paper-like texture that scared him. "Alice?" he called, sighing relief when her eyes slowly drifted open. "Have you been to a doctor lately?" he asked with a frown. "I think there's something wrong. Your skin feels like it'll tear any minute now, and there's a bluish butt to it. It doesn't look good." Alice smiled, but she didn't try to get up. "Everything is all right." Jack didn't believe her, but she was a stranger, and he didn't want to push too hard. "You sure?" "Yes," she nodded. "I'm extremely grateful to you, Jack. And to Rick. I thought I was going to die, but you saved my life. I want to repay you for everything you did." Jack chuckled and shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same thing, Alice. Just focus on getting enough rest." No. She struggled to sit up again, and Jack assisted her. He helped her off the board and onto the bed. "Is there something you need?" "Anything. I have money," she said. "Enough money to help you with whatever you want in life." Jack held her arms gently. "You're very appreciative, Alice, and I love that. But I'm good. Rick and I are good. Thank you." Then he looked at Rick. "Rick did all the hard work." "I guess I should be grateful for him." Alice scratched his ear lovingly. How old is he? Probably 7 years old, Jack answered. I found him abandoned 7 years ago by the side of the road. He was about a year or two old then. Very thin and scraggly. I guess he was thrown out of a moving vehicle because he also had minor cuts and injuries. I took him in. Oh, Alice looked like she would cry. Look at him now. Such a big boy. He is, Jack smiled. We will leave now. Try to rest, okay? Okay. Alice nodded, her face falling. Jack cocked his head at her for a few silent seconds before turning to Rick, who was now watching him pensively. Are you thinking the same thing, Rick? Rick barked, and Jack pursed his lips before lowering himself onto the couch beside the bed. It looks like we're not done saving your life, kiddo. What's wrong? He asked. And don't say nothing, because I can see something is wrong. Alice kept her composure for a few seconds before bursting into a gut-wrenching sob. I'm sick, she cried. I have cancer. I'm going to die soon. What? Jack's heart slammed into his ribcage. He didn't know this lady, but her words cut through him like a knife. I've had it for about 3 years, she said. 4 months ago, the doctor advised me to stop treatment and continue with palliative care because chemotherapy and everything was too harsh. I'm just waiting it out. I'm so sorry, Alice, Jack said, feeling his heart almost cave in. She sounded so broken. I overheard George telling the woman with him that I didn't want to die. He's been writing for my death. It hurts so much because I already transferred everything I own to him. I don't know what to do. You must have a lawyer. Jack sat up. Can this be rectified? You can't lose your wealth to him. No, I don't know what to do. I don't want anyone to find out I'm still alive. This is the lowest point of my life. I just want to die alone. You're not going to die, Jack said with conviction. And I suggest you find a way to reach your lawyer and speak to him about this. You can't let your husband have all your wealth. Alice nodded. Jack looked around. And how did you end up here? I always walk past this place with Rick. I have never seen a soul here. Alice flashed a watery smile. My dad used to live here before he died. George brought me here because, according to him, no one ever came to this part of the woods, so it's the safest place to kill me. Jack shook his head. What do you want to do right now? I'll stay here and lay low. I don't want to return home right now. Jack contemplated her for a long moment. She looked young, and he felt a protective surge come over him. He and Rick enjoyed their solitary life, but judging from how Rick curled at her feet, it was evident that even he didn't want to leave her alone. Okay, kid, he said, rising to his feet. Rick and I are not in a hurry, so we can keep you company for a little while. Let me get you something to eat. You need to replenish your strength. Oh, you don't have to. You've done enough. Alice tried to stand up, but Jack rushed towards her and gently pushed her back onto the bed. Sit down and relax, he scolded. I'll be back soon. As he started to leave, she said, Can I use your phone? Sure. He handed the phone to her and left the room. There was a thin film of dust on everything in the house, and Jack decided to clean it, since she said she would like to stay there for a while. She was too weak, and there was no way she could clean these herself, so he would help. He knew he didn't owe her anything, and he could literally walk away right now and not be wrong. But Jack knew he wouldn't. In a way, this felt like a way to restitute for the mistakes he had made in his life, wrongs that he could never right. This was his way of doing the right thing. After cleaning, he realized the cabinets were empty, which wasn't a shocker. He was even surprised that the appliances in the kitchen were working, seeing as they hadn't been in use for a long time. When the house was sparkling clean, he returned to the room to see Rick curled beside Alice on the bed. I want to go and grab a few things to make food, he told her. I won't be gone for long, okay? Rick will stay with you. Okay. Jack nodded and turned to leave. Jack? He paused on his way out and looked at her. "Thank you." He smiled and walked away, his heart softening. He returned in an hour with vegetables and a few ingredients, which he brought from his shack. He wasn't a rich man by any means, and he grew his vegetables in his backyard, which is how he survived with Rick. When he peeked in the room to see that Alice and Rick were okay, he returned to the kitchen to cook a delicious vegetable soup. When he was done, he served 3 plates and put them in a tray, taking it to the room. He handed one to Alice, placed one on the floor for Rick, and sat on the couch to eat his. "Jack, this is delicious," Alice gasped after taking a spoon. "It's professionally done." Jack shrugged. "I try my best." Alice giggled and continued to eat. They ate in silence for a while until they finished their meals. The room plunged into silence, and Jack waited until Alice was comfortable speaking. "The meal was delicious, Jack. Thank you so much. You've been so nice to me." "It's okay." He stretched his legs before him, resting a little because he'd been on his feet for the past few hours, cleaning and cooking. "What do you do?" Alice asked. "What?" "Your job," she clarified. "What do you do for a living?" Jack shrugged nonchalantly to mask the pain of the memories the question brought up. "I'm just a man with a dog," he said. "What does that mean exactly?" Alice asked with a smile. "I don't understand." "I don't have a job, kid," he said. "I just exist with no direction. Me and my dog." Before she could say any more, he rose to his feet and gently helped her. "Come on, I'll take you to the living room. You can't hole up here all day." Jack helped Alice onto the living room couch, and to his surprise, Rick resumed his position beside her. He shook his head at the dog before walking to the old TV on the stand. "I'm not sure that thing still works," Alice said as he tried to turn it on. "My dad and I used to watch." She paused when the TV smoothly whirred on. "Oh, that's a surprise." "I know." Jack flicked through the channels until he reached a station where they showed cartoons. "Do you like this?" Alice gaped at the TV for a moment before bursting into laughter. "What?" Jack asked. "I'm 30 years old, Jack," she said. Jack scratched the back of his neck. "Does that mean you don't like it?" "Alice, I'm 60 years old. I don't know what you kids watch today." Alice continued to laugh. "It's fine. I love it." Jack sighed with relief and headed for the room. "Jack," Alice called, and he turned to her. "I don't know my lawyer's number, but I know his email. I've sent him an email explaining everything, so if you get a response, please let me know." "Okay." Jack picked up the empty plates from the room and washed them in the kitchen. Then he grabbed his phone from the bedside table and returned to the living room to see Alice fully invested in the show she was watching. Everything looked fine, and Jack felt some fulfillment. "Are you okay?" he asked her, standing by the sofa she was seated on. "Yes, I am." "Okay, it's dark outside," he said, glancing at the window. "I'll leave now, but I'll let Rick stay with you. I'll be back to check on you in the morning." Alice's face fell. "Where are you going?" "Back to my shack," he said. "Why do you have to go?" Alice asked shakily. "It's not a very big house, but we have 2 bedrooms. You can stay." "I'm dirty," Jack said, looking down at his old greasy shirt that was now sweaty and stained with soot. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Alice might be sick, but she still had an air of wealth and dignity around her. "No," she shook her head. "I'm not uncomfortable. I'm so happy that you're here. Please don't go. Stay." Jack smiled and nodded. "Okay." "Check the other room down the hall. It's my dad's. Some clothes are still in the closet. I hope they're in good condition." "Okay." Jack entered the other room and was surprised to see the different varieties of clothes in the closet, all of top quality. He quickly showered and changed into casual cotton shorts and a black shirt before returning to the living room. "Did you see any—" Alice's question froze in her mouth as she looked at Jack. He got worried when tears slipped soundlessly down her cheeks. "Seeing you wear my father's clothes reminds me so much of him," she said. Jack laughed and settled beside her on the couch. "Are you okay?" "I miss him so much, Jack," she sighed. "If he were alive, none of this would have happened." "I'm sorry." Alice shook her head. He loved this house so much because he built it himself. It might be small, but it was his pride and joy. Even when the restaurant business kicked off and we started making money, he refused to move. He said it reminded him of his old days of struggle. "I understand him," Jack answered. "May he continue to rest in peace." Over the next few weeks, Jack and Rick stayed with Alice to make sure she was okay. She was too weak to walk or do anything by herself, and Rick refused to even move from her side. Alice didn't know why Jack and Rick treated her so nicely, and every morning when she saw them, she told herself how lucky she was to meet people like them in the woods shortly after she was almost killed. The day after Jack found her, he drove her to the hospital, where she met with the doctors in secrecy. Nurse Sandy was speechless to hear everything George did, but promised to keep silent until Alice was ready to speak the truth. For now, she just wanted to lay low in her father's house and use the drugs that the hospital prescribed. As for her lawyer, he told her that it took months to transfer ownership of wealth to someone else's name entirely, so her properties didn't belong to George yet, which was fantastic news. Alice told him to silently halt the process and let her know if George called to ask why the properties weren't in his name yet. He agreed. Right now, it's been 3 months since she's been resting in her father's house and taking her medications diligently, and she was beginning to feel good. Her skin was starting to feel firmer, the dizziness gone, and this morning she noticed a few strands of hair on her head. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection and being afraid to hope that the cancer was regressing, and that's why she was getting better. She had another checkup with the hospital in 6 months, and until then, Alice didn't want to raise her hopes, because what if it was all in her imagination? What if this was just a phase that would pass soon, and she went back to being unable to lift an arm by herself? "Alice!" She whirled to see Jack standing by the door, his face a mask of shock as he looked at her. In 3 months, his face had meant so much to her. She loved this man like a father and could not get over what he and his dog had done for her. "You're standing on your own?" "Yes," Alice laughed. "I've been doing this privately for days, but I didn't want to tell you until I felt really strong." She walked towards him, laughing harder when his shock intensified. "Oh my goodness!" he shrieked, embracing her. "I knew it. I saw the change in your skin and mood. You're getting better, Alice." "We don't know that yet," Alice said mildly. "I don't want to get my hopes up until another 3 months when I go to the doctor. Until then, let's take it one step at a time." "Fine." His smile widened. "I came to ask who set up the picnic mat and food spread outside." "It was me." Alice looped her arm around his and led him outside. Rick was running around the lawn trying to catch butterflies. "I did it while you were out as a surprise." "You cooked?" His brows rose at the food on the mat. Alice laughed. "Of course I cooked. I used to cook so well before I got sick, and now that I'm feeling well, I will cook more. You've been cooking for 3 months. It's time you rest your feet, you old man." Jack laughed as she lowered him onto the mat. "Oh, now I'm an old man." "Yes, you are," Alice teased. "You're literally 30 years younger than me. I'm stronger than you, so sit down and let me take care of you." "I still think you need to rest even though you're getting better," Jack said. "But I'm glad to see you this way." "Thank you, Jack. For everything," Alice said seriously. Jack rolled his eyes and plucked a grape into his mouth. This food had better taste good. Alice lay on the hospital bed, fighting to keep the smile on her face. but Jack's tight squeeze on her hand was a reminder of the fear that they both felt. For the past 6 months, Jack watched her go from being unable to lift a finger to walking by herself, running around the house with Rick, cooking breakfast, lunch and dinner, taking Rick on long walks, and sometimes joining Jack with household repairs. She felt herself get better with every new day, and Jack also commented on how healthy she looked. But this was the ultimate test, and they feared it had all been in her imagination. She had come to the hospital with Jack and Rick, her new family, a few hours ago, and the doctor had performed a comprehensive checkup on her. Now, the results were almost here, and Alice suddenly felt sick again. She felt the familiar cold dread settle into her bones, making her feel heavy. The door opened and she jumped when the doctors entered, followed by a team of nurses, including Sandy. Their expressions were unreadable. Jack's hand squeezed hers even tighter until it almost hurt, but Alice didn't mind. She kept her attention on the team before her. "Doctor?" "Alice," the doctor began, his voice gentle but firm. "We have the results from your latest checkup." Time slowed down and tears stung Alice's eyes. "I'm still sick, aren't I?" she whispered. "The cancer is still there. It's never going away." Rick whined at the pain in her voice, and so did Jack, who patted her shoulders gently. "Don't give up now, Alice. You'll beat this," he said. "She already did," the doctor said. It took Alice and Jack a few seconds for his words to register. "What?" they screeched. "It's gone. The cancer is gone. You're in remission. You beat this, Alice. This is a very rare occurrence." Alice burst into tears as Jack flung his arms around her. "You did it, Alice! You did it!" The nurses walked to the bed, embracing her and fighting back tears. Sandy lost her fight and began to sob while she hugged Alice. "You are so strong," she said. "After everything you went through with George, I feared you would stop fighting. You are a strong woman." "Thank you, Sandy, for everything." Alice felt a sudden lightness she hadn't felt in years as adrenaline pumped through her veins. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire, and soon her room was full of strangers and hospital staff coming to wish her hearty congratulations. Alice hugged everyone while laughing until her face hurt. Moments later, she stood in the hallway with Jack and Rick, surrounded by people she barely knew but feeling the happiest she'd ever felt. Nurse Sandy stood by the I Beat Cancer bell, mounted on the wall, an encouraging smile on her face. "Come on, Alice, you've earned this." "Go, Alice! Go, Alice!" With an encouraging nod from Jack, Alice walked towards the bell with her heart beating wildly in her chest. She stopped before the wall and tugged on the rope attached to the bell. It rang out loud and clear, but the shrill noise was drowned by the cheers and clapping behind her. Alice started to sob again, but this time she did so, knowing everything would be all right. "Come on," Nurse Sandy grabbed her arm. "We threw you a mini party in the common room, and guess what? I made sure we had mint chocolate chip ice cream." A week later, Alice sat in a cosy eatery with Jack for their private celebration. She was wearing a gold shimmery dress with a fitting wig on, while Jack wore a black suit. She had taken a private booth because she was about to have an emotional conversation with him and didn't trust herself not to cry. They had just finished the most delicious pasta ever and were relaxing with an expensive glass of wine. "You look happy," Jack commented, putting the glass to his lips to take a sip. Alice swirled her glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the overhead light. "I am happy," she said. "This is the happiest I've ever been. I understand. I still can't believe it. It all feels surreal." She sighed. "I'm ready to fight George," she says eventually. "The lawyer emailed me last night saying George called him with a private number to ask when the transfer would be completed." Jack frowned. "What did your lawyer tell him?" "My lawyer told him they would need his signature for the final transfer, so George must come in for it." Did George agree? Jack asked hopefully. Of course he's a greedy man, he agreed. My lawyer will let me know when they meet, and I'll be waiting with the police. Jack smiled. I'm glad this worked out well. I can't imagine losing everything you've worked for to a man like that. I was foolish. I'd never make the same mistake again. No, you weren't. Jack reached out to touch her arm. You weren't foolish. Don't you dare put this on yourself. Alice glanced up at him. Why did you do everything you did for me? She asked. Are you an angel? I don't get it. You gave everything. How can I thank you? How can I repay you? You were like a father to me. Alice, Jack called, and to her surprise, tears slipped down his face. She reared back in shock because she had never seen him cry. Not even when the doctor announced that she beat cancer, he didn't cry. Why now? A father, he echoed, shaking his head. Alice, I should be thanking you. You gave my life purpose. What do you mean? Alice asked. Before you, I was roaming through life aimlessly, hoping for a second chance, hoping for an opportunity to right my wrong and do something good with my life. He cried harder, and Alice itched to comfort him, but it looked like he wanted to say a lot, so she just let him speak. About 6 months ago, you asked me what I did for a living. Yes, Alice nodded, eager to learn more about this man who had remained a mystery despite giving her everything. About 20 years ago, I was a football coach, he said. I was very successful. I was young and making money. It made me reckless. I got into drugs and alcohol. Oh my goodness! I got so sucked into this reckless wife I started to neglect my beautiful wife and son. My family, he sobbed harder. When she got this private booth, she did it for herself. It looked like Jack needed it more. My wife Sarah grew tired and began confronting me about the neglect. I got mad and raised my hand to her. His eyes held a lot of pain and sorrow, and Alice's heart broke. I raised my hand to the woman I loved so much. I'd always regret it the morning after, but when I got drunk again, I'd repeat the same thing. Sometimes, even in front of my son. Jack's face was wet with tears, and he still couldn't stop. His eyes held a faraway look, like he wasn't in the eatery with her anymore. Alice knew he was thinking back to 20 years ago when he made these mistakes. One morning, he said in a whisper, I woke up after a drunken night in an empty house. They were gone. Sarah had fled, and she took Tom with her. I kept thinking it was a joke or a trick. I called her, but it never went through. She disappeared, and something in me died that morning. Alice didn't know she was crying until the tear dropped onto her hand. She gently patted her face with a serviette. You've been alone ever since? Yes. Jack nodded, wiping his face with his shirt. I loved them so much, Alice. I swear. I was wrong. I was stupid. It's okay. Alice reached out to pat his hands. I'm so sorry, Jack. How old was Tom? He was 12, Jack smiled through his tears. Very handsome boy. I'm so sorry. When you asked me if I wanted anything after saving you those years ago, I didn't say anything. The only thing I want in the world is to see Sarah and Tom again. I don't care about houses or cars. I'd give anything, including my life, to see them again. What's your full name, Jack? Jack Hardman. Why? Nothing. Alice shook her head gently. Just curious. Later that night, in the privacy of her bedroom, Alice made an essential call to her very influential lawyer, who knew a lot of people. Alice, he said as soon as he took the call, how are you? We've been sending emails for months. I'm glad to hear your voice. Thank you, Davidson, Alice smiled. But this is quite important. What is it? I'd like to hire a private investigator, she said. Do you have a recommendation? I'm looking for a man. His name is Tom Hardman. He should be about 30 years old. Okay. I know a very good PI, Davidson said. He'll find this guy for you faster than you can blink. Excuse me, Alice approached a group of students loitering at the hall's entrance. Can you direct me to Professor Hardman's office? Sure. One of the girls nodded. It's just down the hall. There's a nameplate on the door. Thank you so much. Alice hurried down the hall, feeling anxious about what she was about to do. After 2 months, the private investigator she hired finally sent her Tom Hardman's details last week, and she had spent time buying her tickets and preparing her speech for when she would run into Jack's son. She ended up in this university where Tom was a professor in business administration. Although she had spent days preparing for this moment, as she neared Tom's office, she realized she didn't know what to say. Her phone rang and she took it out of her bag, smiling when she saw Jack's name on the screen. She picked up the call, stopping in front of an office with Professor Hardman on the door. Hey, kiddo, Jack said. You're still not going to tell me what you're off doing? Nope. She had kept this entire plan away from Jack until she was sure things would go according to plan. She didn't want to hurt him a second time. Fine. When are you returning? Rick misses you. Rick missed me or you miss me, she laughed. Duh. It's Rick, he huffed. I'm just glad to have some peace around here. Alice laughed. Okay, I gotta go. I'll be back tonight or tomorrow morning. Take care. Fine. I'll talk to you later. When he hung up, Alice put her phone back into her bag and took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Come in. A deeply masculine voice came from within. Alice opened the door, only to freeze at the doorway as her eyes found the man behind the desk. Tom was as tall and bulky as his father, but that was where the resemblance ended. He had dark curly hair with a lock that fell across his forehead, giving him a rakish look. His eyes were a light blue, whereas Jack's eyes were brown. Jack wasn't lying when he said his son was handsome. He really was. Hello? Tom frowned. Can I help you? Alice shook out of her daze and hurried to the desk. I'm sorry, my name is Alice Brand. Hello, Alice. He stood to shake her hands and Alice felt her heart skip. She had never felt an instant attraction to anyone like this before. Please sit. He waited until she sat before doing the same. There was a curious frown in his eyes, and Alice decided to plunge right without beating around the bush. I'm here on behalf of your father, she said, and his demeanour changed. Excuse me? He yanked the glasses off his face and frowned. Mr. Jack Hardman, Alice said. It was apparent that Tom didn't want to have anything to do with his father, but Alice wasn't leaving until he heard her out. Miss Brand, I need you to leave my office, Tom said seriously. Please, please. She leaned forward. Just give me a chance. Hear me out. Tom stared at her for a few seconds before nodding. Alice launched into everything that has happened over the past 10 months. She explained how Jack and Rick found her, how he took care of her selflessly, and how he did it as a way of restitution for the loss of his family. Alice explained Jack's hurt and regret, citing how Jack had stayed alone after all this time. He regrets everything he did to you, Alice said. I know I'm not qualified to tell you how to deal with your trauma, but if you can meet with him, even if it's just once. He really wants to see his family again. There was silence until Tom sniffed. To Alice's shock, she realized that he was crying. Her heart broke, and she felt tears threaten to fall, but she tried to remain strong. This wasn't about her. My father and I used to be so close, Tom said. I was confused when he started hurting my mum. He loved her so much, that's what I thought. He would disappear for days without coming home, and we would wait for him. But when he returned, it was right back to hurting Mum. I'm so sorry. It's been 20 years, Tom wiped his tears. And in all this time, I've thought about him, wondering if he regrets everything. Because I do. Alice felt hope blossom in her chest. He regrets it, Tom. He does. Does he know you're here? No, she shook her head. I didn't want to get his hopes up. Tom dropped his head into his hands and Alice saw the war in his eyes. She hoped the goodness of his heart won and that he agreed to visit his father. "What about your mum?" she asked. Tom glanced up. "She passed away 7 years ago." "I'm so sorry, Mr. "Please call me Tom," he said with a slight smile. "You've just sat there and watched me cry. I think we can skip the formalities." Alice laughed, heat rising to her cheeks. "Okay, Tom." I have a week off next month," he said finally. "Maybe I can come see for myself how remorseful my father is." Alice whooped with joy before catching herself. "Okay, his birthday is also next month. We can surprise him then." "I'm all in." A month later, they were sitting at a table and waiting for Jack to arrive. "He doesn't want a loud birthday celebration," Alice said. "He thinks it's just me and Rick waiting for him." "I think we're alike in that aspect," Tom laughed, sipping from his wine glass. "I have never celebrated my birthday." "What?" Alice laughed. "No." There was a happy birthday balloon hanging from the ceiling with several gifts on the living room table. Today was Jack's birthday, and Alice wished she could go all hard for him, but he made it clear that he didn't want a big birthday, so she respected his wishes. 5 gift boxes were on the table, 2 of which were from Tom. Since meeting Tom in his office a month ago, they have talked daily. At first, they started talking under the guise of planning Jack's birthday, but they soon dropped the pretense and moved to talking about themselves. She knew everything about Tom, down to what he ate 2 nights ago. Right now, they were in her house, with Rick, waiting for Jack to arrive. Alice couldn't wait to see his face when he saw Tom. "Thank you for coming, Tom," Alice said, meeting his gaze. "I know you have your reservations, but it means so much to me that you're here." Tom smiled. "Honestly, you didn't have to do too much to convince me," he said. "When you walked into my office, I was blown away by everything. Your beauty, your voice, your—" "What?" Alice's eyes widened. She didn't know Tom was feeling the same way she did. "I like you, Alice. He was interrupted by a knock on the door, and she hurried to the window to see Jack standing on the porch. Rick began to bark. "It's your dad," she whispered, pushing him into the hall. "Hide." As she was about to head back to the door, Tom grabbed her. "Before I come out, I want him to open the red box. There's a gift inside. I want to see his reaction to it before I make my final decision." "What's inside?" Alice asked. "You won't understand," Tom answered, "but if he misses me like he said, he would." The knock came again, and Alice hurried to the door to swing it open. Jack stood outside with a smile. "What's going on? Took you so long to come to the door," he said, walking into the house. Rick threw himself against Jack, and the two played with each other for a moment. "Happy birthday, Jack." "Thank you," his smile widened. "I know you were dying to throw a big party. Thanks for listening to me." Alice rolled her eyes and directed him to the couch. "I'll throw a big party next year, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Jack's gaze fell on the table. "This is a lot of gifts," he said. "Are they for me alone?" "You're the only one whose birthday is today, right?" she teased. "Do you want to open them? Start with the red box." "No," Jack shook his head. "Isn't it too early to open presents?" "It's not. We're the only ones here." Alice picked up the red box and put it on his lap. "Open it." "You're too stubborn," Jack said grudgingly, untying the ribbon and opening the box. There was a faded muffler inside with an inscription of what she guessed was the name of a football club. The muffler looked frayed and old. It didn't appear to be much of a gift, but Jack's reaction said it meant so much more. He dumped the box and held up the muffler, his eyes filling with tears as he caressed the fabric lovingly. "Alice, where did you get this?" he asked, not looking at her. Speak." The volume of his voice increased. "This cannot be a random gift. No!" Tears slipped down his face. "It looks so much like the muffler I gave to my son on his 12th birthday," he said, pressing the fabric to his nose. "It still smells like him. God, this hurts so much. Haven't I been punished enough? I miss him so much." "He missed you too." Tom stepped out of the hallway. Jack's head snapped toward the voice, his eyes widening. He rubbed his eyes and slowly rose to his feet. "Tom?" "Yes, Dad?" Jack burst into a sob, his arms outstretched as he ran towards his son. Alice cried as the men hugged each other, both sobbing hard. "I cannot believe this," Jack exclaimed. He pulled away from his son and held his face. "Tom? Is this you?" "Yes, Dad." Tom laughed amidst his tears. "Oh, my son." Jack shook his head. "I'm so sorry for everything. Forgive me, please, I'm sorry. I know I hurt you and I can't take it back, but I'm sorry." Tom smiled. "I wish we had this reunion when Mum was alive, but she passed away 7 years ago." "Oh." Jack fell to his knees, groaning painfully. Tom lifted him. "It's okay, Dad. We've found each other now. I'm sure Mum is happy." Jack turned to Alice. "How did you find him? How did you do this?" "I hired a private investigator and—" Alice began, but her breath was momentarily knocked out when Jack pulled her into a bear hug. Alice smiled, feeling fulfilled. "You're a blessing to me, Alice. I bless the day I found you." Alice's gaze found Tom's over his father's shoulders, and he smiled warmly at her. Alice pulled away from Jack and said, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to find your son. Not only did I find him, but I found myself a treasure." Jack frowned. "What treasure?" Smiling, Alice turned to Tom. She didn't want to make this all about her, but she didn't want the day to go by without telling him his feelings were reciprocated. "Tom, I like you too," she said. "I have since the first day I walked into your office." Tom gaped at her for a moment before hugging her. Jack clapped excitedly. "Oh my goodness," he said. "This is the happiest day of my life. How did I go from being lonely to having 2 children and a dog?" They all laughed at his joke, and as Alice stared into Tom's eyes, she knew she had found peace at last. Tomorrow she would deal with George and every other trouble that came with it, but today she would enjoy the happiness coursing through her body as she celebrated with her new family. She was happy now, and nothing could take that away from her.